On episode 388 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet John Little and discuss his book, The Time Savers Workout. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/388. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad you're here today. Before we get into the interview, which is a really cool one, you're not going to want to miss this, I did want to take just a moment to remind you that I have opened up 5 slots for one-on-one personal training. You can email me, alan@40plusfitnesspodcast.com. I'll chat with you a little bit there, but I'll send you a link to the application, basically. And then I'm going to select 5 people. And those 5 people that I select, they're going to get founders prices, which is the lowest I've ever offered one-on-one personal training with 40 Plus Fitness. So if you want your chance to work out with me, be a part of what we're doing here, and it's accountability, it's workouts. I mean, I actually provide you programming. We talk about nutrition. We talk about other health issues. You have me one-on-one. You have access to me via email and text. You also have access to the group stuff. So there's group accountability. So it's a really great opportunity for you to get healthy and fit. I know during the summer, sometimes we get a little off track, but you can have it both. You just need a coach to help keep you on track. So email me, alan@40plusfitnesspodcast.com. I'll send you a link to the application, fill out the application, and then 5 people that I select for one-on-one training are going to get founders pricing. alan@40plusfitnesspodcast.com. I'm looking forward to seeing your email. Now, our guest today has a degree in philosophy from McMaster University, and he's written a ton of books on Bruce Lee, but he's also been the co-author with both Mike Midser and Doug McGruff. Doug's book, Body by Science, is one of the few books that I recommend everyone who wants to do resistance training read. It's a really good book. I stand by it even today. We had Doug on the show, and I'm going to go ahead and link to that show in the show notes. So if you go to the show notes, you can find that podcast as well. But the book that John's released now is actually called The Time Savers Workout. And it's a really cool book. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So with no further ado, here's John Little. John, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you, Alan. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here. I had Dr. McGuff on to talk about some of his books, including Body by Science. When I was first doing my first interviews, I was kind of a little starstruck when I met him the first time. And I'll have to admit, just, reading your books, I'm a little starstruck talking to you too.
Well, no need for that. Doug, I can understand.
Yeah.
I consider Doug one of the brightest minds in exercise science. So,
and I think you are too. That's just based on the research that you've done. I mean, this is a very well researched book. We're talking about the Time Savers Workout, which I think is actually pretty cool because most of us, if you ask people why they're not working out, they'll say, most of the time they'll say, I don't have time. So
right.
giving us the workout that is, I guess, what biohackers like to call the minimum viable dose is really, really cool.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, I mean, from my vantage point, I just think the most valuable commodity in our lives is time. And once spent, it's irretrievable. You can't get it back. And nobody on their deathbed, is going to say, geez, I wish I'd spent more time in the gym, because life offers way more than what a gym does. The purpose of a workout really is to be an adjunct to your life, not the reason for it. And so, doing any more than is minimally required seems to me time that could be better spent.
Yeah, I know when I was in my 20s and college, I kind of had this time so I'd finish my final class around 1:30, and then I would go to the gym and I'd get my workout done, and then I would just sort of hang out. And typically it was the owner would say, "Hey, Alan, you're going to be here for another hour. I know. I'm going to get my lunch. Just if you're okay to hang around, that'd be cool." And I'd hang around. Eventually, just started giving me the gym membership for free because I would do that stuff for him. But I loved being in the gym. It was fun. Had a lot of friends there, and it was really cool. But like you said, now I'm kind of a little bit more time restrained sometimes. And I go into the gym, and it's funny because you'll walk into the gym and the folks are working out, typically just doing, the arms, like I'll see someone
Oh
doing this
yeah,
workout,
yeah,
and I'll go in and do a full body workout and leave. And they're still they're still working those little biceps. And
yeah.
I'm like,
Oh, for
okay.
sure, for sure. Well, I think back when you and I, because we're approximately the same age, had started training, it was like a cause celeb that we were behind. We wanted to be bigger and stronger individuals, and the worship of muscle was the church, and anyone who was in a gym was a compadre. We were all part of the same belief, and put a value on looking like professional bodybuilders that and looking back was probably misplaced, but that at the time it fueled our young imaginations. That's what we wanted to do, and every hour we could spend in a gym or among people that shared our belief was we might learn something. It might advance us a little closer toward our goal. And I think eventually over time, and after banging your head against a brick wall in terms of an arrested development that is not progressing despite the efforts, many of us began looking for another way. We didn't want to give up the cause entirely, but eventually we kind of recognized that, well, maybe what we were told wasn't completely true. That maybe our diligence and the money that we threw out the window every month on supplements and protein powders in order to achieve this look that was never going to come, maybe we'd been duped. And consequently, I think a lot of people who were of our antiquity probably just washed their hands of the enterprise at a certain point in their lives, and either in despair stopped doing anything like that, or went into some other form of activity that was at least enjoyable and didn't promise unrealistic rewards for their time. And so certainly in my case, I was lucky to recognize that there was an alternative out there, and that was mainly through the influence of people like Mike Metzer and people that said as much. That number one, you're never going to look like a champion bodybuilder. It's not in the genes. But number two, there's still a lot to be gained from this enterprise. And so my interest, especially as I got older, shifted more onto the benefits that proper resistance training could impart to a person, as opposed to the cosmetic component.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of people, and I've even in my book, I kind of said, when I talk to you about fitness, when I say fitness, I'm no longer talking about the kind of fitness that you want to be a professional hockey player, or that you want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, or that's what you kind of view fitness. To me, fitness now, once we get over 40, should be more about living the life that you want to live. And I think,
right,
in many ways, resistance training is an absolute imperative for us to do that.
Yeah, to be able to do the things that you enjoy doing, the things that give your life meaning, you have to be strong enough to be able to do them. And the natural process of aging is entropy. We're going to lose fibers, not lose them, but downsize them to the point where we can lose the ability to use them. And that suddenly restricts the circle in which we can move in terms of things we can do. So anything we can do to keep that balloon in the air in terms of full fiber health and function for as long as possible is a step in the right direction, because it's coming down. It's the natural, entropy of human existence. When you're born, it's kind of like a bullet that's shot in the air, and it reaches the peak height at about age 25. But then it starts to return to earth. And, up until 25, you got bigger and stronger just as part of the natural growth process. And so you would have gotten bigger and stronger by taking garbage out every week. Didn't really matter what you did. But once you pass a certain age, typically once we exit our 20s, our body becomes like a very stingy board of directors, and they want to know why they're investing this energy into keeping these muscle fibers preserved and hanging around that you simply never use. I mean, the fight or flight fibers, the fast twitch fibers, the ones coincidentally that happen to have the greatest potential for a size increase and that affect our health the most dramatically, are the first to go, typically because of costs the body the most energy to keep them on the payroll. So if you autopsy a 90-year-old, you're going to find slow twitch fibers that are very well preserved, but the intermediate and fast twitch are going to be decomposed at an alarming rate unless you do something to convince your body to keep them.
Yeah, I know. I was reading a study, and they had done some biopsies of older runners, runners that had run their whole lives.
Right.
And they compared those to active runners in their 20s and 30s, and found that from the, like you said, the fast twitch muscles, I got that right, slow twitch muscles, I guess, they retain those, and so from a muscular perspective, they had stayed very similar. And the same can actually be said for people that do resistance training, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that if you do a type of resistance training that calls upon fast twitch fibers and intermediate twitch fibers, you will preserve them. There's still going to be a loss. There's just, you can't buck up against nature, indefinitely. But, whatever can be done to preserve them will preserve them. And the thing that can be done to preserve them is to use them, to give your body a reason to keep them on the payroll. And, otherwise the natural course of things is simply to downsize them. So when you do a type of resistance training, the cool thing about resistance training is that it hits all three classes of fibers, generally speaking. It gets slow twitch, intermediate twitch, and fast twitch. And so your body is given a very strong prompt to hold on to those despite the aging process. And I think that's very important, not only for our functional ability, but also for our metabolic health, because each of those fibers contain metabolic pathways that erode with the muscle if you don't do something to preserve them.
Now, one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is that they go in the gym and they get a program, and here's a program where they see all the images, the before and after, and some of those guys that are before and after, they're in their 40s and 50s, and you see them, they kind of put on a good amount of muscle, but someone else will do the same program and not quite get the same results. And you kind of talk about in the book about how we kind of each have our own individual response to how things work.
Right, absolutely. And there was a study that I quoted by a physiologist named Van Etten. And what was interesting about this is they had two groups, one that was mesomorphic or quite muscular, and the other thin or ectomorphic. And they put them on an identical exercise program for a period of 12 weeks, and then they monitored the results. And at the end of the study, it was discovered that the mesomorphic, or the group that was muscular before the workout, experienced significant gains in muscle mass, while the ectomorphic group experienced no significant improvement at all. So the takeaway from that is those who are inordinately muscular to begin with, who have that genetic gift, will gain size and strength from the bodybuilding efforts to a much greater extent than those who are not, who don't share that morphology. And of course, the bodybuilding industry ignores this, but and they feature the ones that
sell that. Yeah, they can't sell that.
No, but it also looks, when we think back on our early training careers, and you mentioned Arnold. I mean, he was the guy, right? So we went into the gym and we bought Arnold's book, The Education of a Bodybuilder, and we followed his program as best we could. We never got Arnold-like results, but if you look at a picture of Arnold when he was 18 or 17, I mean, we would have been happy to look like that, when he started. But it just isn't in the genetic cards. So to ape, a popular bodybuilder's program, the very fact that you're looking to look different than you do would strongly suggest that you don't have the genes to look the way that you want. Otherwise, even a little bit of training would suggest that potential. So, anytime you see a bodybuilding magazine, and I used to write for bodybuilding magazines, the articles in there really have zero application to you, zero. So, and it's like trying to copy an Olympic athlete's training program. Good luck with that. I remember Mike Mentzer, who was perhaps the most honest bodybuilder I ever encountered in my career, saying, someone had asked him or had mentioned that Roy Callender, who was another famous bodybuilder who was known for his density of muscle, that he did something like 100 sets for his chest. And Mike said, well, you try doing 100 sets for your chest and see what happens. He said, you'll end up looking like a jockey. He said, because most of these bodybuilders would look like jockeys were it not for the amount of steroids they take.
Yeah.
And that was never discussed in the magazines really back in the day. But genetics are the big one. They are what will determine how much muscle, if that's your interest, you can put on. And it determines everything else from your height to your hair color. I mean, it's the great Oz. It's the one that makes the declaration as to how far you can go. And for most of us, we're going to bump up against our genetic potential in terms of muscle size, which is a more easily discernible indice of potential, usually within a year, at the most 2 years of training. And it's interesting, being older now, my sons have friends who are at the age I was when I got into bodybuilding or in the strength training, and the friends are into it. And you can see a real difference in their physique over the course of 1 year, maybe even a year and a half. And then, boom, that's the end of the road. And they're frustrated because, their first year of training, they were experiencing this transformational benefit cosmetically of doing these workouts. Muscles became bigger, and as a result, their metabolic rates increased, body fats tended to come off the body a little easier, and they want to keep it going. And I recognize that as an attitude that was present in myself at that age, but it doesn't. And then they start looking for other things that can help them. Maybe they need more protein. Maybe they need to change their program to one more closely resembling that of a bigger type of bodybuilder. But they're not going to get any bigger. And you've been around long enough to know that you've probably observed the same phenomenon. There's a genetic cap that's put on these things. We don't know what it is ahead of time, but we do know that the best gains most of us ever had were our first year of training. Serious training.
And
then after that,
that was the first year coming back. I mean, if you trained as when you were in your 20s or 30s, and maybe you got untrained because you just, life got in the way. Like with me, when I came back in the gym, it was like, okay, boom, things looked really, really good. And then, like you said, it kind of plateaued. So you'd go to the trainer and say, okay, let's mix this up. Let's try something different. But in a general sense, you could refine it a little bit, but you just really couldn't go beyond that line.
Well, you can't transcend. Yeah, you can't transcend it. So the thing is, you go to training for a while, your muscles decondition, they atrophy, you get back into training, they come back again, and you notice the difference. But as far as some of these older guys that appear in the magazines, I mean, it's clear that there's some chemical enhancement going on there.
Yeah.
No 65-year-old has 2% body fat and a 17-inch arm. And suddenly built it at age 60. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't happen unless and the thing is, steroids are an interesting thing. It's not that dissimilar from what they now, euphemistically call testosterone replacement therapy. You're still getting synthetic exogenous hormones put into your body. You're not producing them. And the problem is that nobody knows what the long-term ramifications of this is. I mean, most of the bodybuilders that I grew up being fans of in the 70s are either dead or have had serious coronary problems. And because there's never been studies done on steroids long-term, because they were originally not intended for, to be used for cosmetic purposes. They were used to treat burn victims, to facilitate the production of tissue. But then we found out, about this great muscle building component, and that became the priority. But there is never long-term studies done to know what the problems are. I mean, step back and think, after, several 100,000 years of evolution, maybe there's a reason that 7-year-old guys aren't producing the same level of testosterone they did at 17. And when we know that if someone gets certain types of cancers, the first thing doctors will do is try and cut out any testosterone in the body at all, because that causes the cancers to spread, to metastasize. So, there's tumors that can be awakened in your liver, let's say, from certain endocrine responses that may not be, a good thing to awaken. We don't know. We're playing with nature a little bit with that. But like I say, there's probably a reason, after all these years of evolution, that our bodies tend to reduce testosterone production. So when I see a guy in a magazine who claims to be 70 years old, and he's got a physique that more closely resembles that of a steroid taking 20-year-old, that doesn't impress me. That tells me, hey, I have a very insecure 7-year-old who thinks, that life is all about from the neck down. You don't see pictures of these guys writing novels. You don't see pictures of them painting great paintings or composing music. They just sit there in a Speedo and say, look at me. And that's the extent of their enthusiasm for life. I knew a guy in California. He used to hang around Joe Weider's office quite a bit. And he always claimed to be older than he was. And because he thought he looked more impressive physically if he told people he was 75 or whatever. He was maybe in his late 60s, but heavy steroid user, and would be open about it and say how great he looked. And then, it wasn't enough that he was married. He had to try and impress younger women. And I mean, nothing the guy said appealed to me at all. I didn't find him cool. I didn't find him, oh, geez, I want to be like this guy. I mean, to me, the fake tan, the the capped teeth, the perfectly coiffed hair, and fake muscles, basically. It was Arthur Jones' old line about a little boy in a gorilla suit. This was an old man in a gorilla suit, and the gorilla suit wasn't that big to begin with.
Yeah, I think the key of it is, and that's what I really like about the listener this I have on the show, is they're not looking for necessarily the vanity look, or they're not going for that approach. This truly is about wellness, and what can we do, and how can we use resistance training to enhance our wellness. And one of the concepts that you had in the book that I think is really, really important for us to understand is this conservation of energy, and how that impacts how our muscles grow or how we lose weight. Or can you kind of talk through a little bit of this conservation of energy and how our bodies kind of do this?
Yeah, well, it's a funny phenomenon. I've labeled it the conservation of energy phenomenon, or CEP, just so I can have a moniker for it. But it's just the natural course of action of the body to conserve energy every step of the way. Energy is one of the most vital resources that we have, apart from air and water. For without it, we die. So very early on in our species history, our bodies discerned a means by which it would learn to control the amount of energy that it was outputting from the body for any task that we had to undertake. Since all of the tasks were muscular in nature, it therefore impacted the muscular system. So you can, for example, the most common example I use is the first time you ever drove a standard automobile, standard transmission. It was exhausting. Every muscle group was fully engaged, and as well as your consciousness, as you checked the mirrors and you worked the clutch and the shift and the brake and the gas. By the time you finished your first session learning how to drive a standard automobile, you were exhausted. But then fast forward, about a month or two, and you find yourself zipping down the highway, changing gears while you're changing the radio dial. It's effortless. And it's not that the first time you did it, that was a real workout, but it felt like it. But later what happened was your body recognized that it overmobilized its forces. It used way more muscle fibers and thus way more energy than it required in order to accomplish this task that you've set before it, that of changing gears and working the clutch. So over time, it learned to pull back and just use the precise amount of fibers at the precise time that they were required, rather than all together at once. And consequently, your heart and lungs and your metabolic system were no longer servicing 100% of the tissues that they were 2 months previously when you first started. Maybe it was on the order now of 15%. So it's not nearly as demanding. But then I could see that application to every physical activity we did. For example, runners who, let's say in the Northeast, when the snow comes, they have to run indoors on a treadmill because they don't want to run on the ice. So they, tick along on their treadmills, and they believe their cardiovascular system's in pretty good shape. And then the snow goes away in the spring, and they say, okay, time to run on the road. Well, invariably, their first road run feels like they've never run before in their lives. Their heart's going like a trip hammer. They're sweating, pouring sweat. Their chest is heaving. Their muscles ache for days after the first run. But they do it again, just like the guy in the standard automobile. And they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And lo and behold, that same route, run at the same speed, less than a month later, it's effortless. Their pulse rate's barely leaving a baseline. They're not nearly as sore. They're not breathing nearly as heavy. And they pat themselves in the back saying, I've really improved my cardiovascular system. Well, no, what happened was the CEP stepped in again. So now, rather than the first time running where your heart and lungs were servicing the working of 100% of the tissue, maybe now it's on the order of 25%, maybe less. So of course your pulse rate's not going to be driven up. Of course the amount of fibers brought into play won't be as much. But I see it in everything. I see it in everything we do, from lifting a coffee cup to working out. And the body's means of conserving energy. And they did a fascinating study that I cite in the book, where they tested the calorie burn, or the energy output, of people walking. And they got a value of that. And then they put them in an exoskeleton, or a mechanical suit that altered their gait, the way their stride, so that it was more demanding, was a little more challenging. And to nobody's surprise, they burned more calories. But the very next time they put on the exoskeleton, they were right back to the calories that they were burning before. The body had made the adaptation. So it occurs, probably quicker than we think. But you can see that has preservation value. We kind of have two things that are hardwired into our consciousness with regard, maybe even to our DNA as regard to energy. And one is, if you come upon energy, consume it, because it may not be there tomorrow. And the second one is, if you don't have to output a lot of energy, don't, because you may not get it back out of your environment. Now, this has a life-saving value to a species such as ours that lived for eons in an environment of food scarcity, because it allowed us to conserve energy until we got to an area where there may be a little more food to sustain us. But the only thing that's changed is not our biology over this time, but our environment. We now live in an environment of food abundance. Consequently, these two impulses are still at play. So if there's food or energy, we ought to consume it. And there's still almost a primal fear that, it may not be there tomorrow. And the other thing is, when it comes to exercise, all of us instinctively loathe high energy output activity. And it could simply be because there's a part of our biology that says you may not get that back. Don't work quite so hard, especially if you don't have to. So given that most people aren't physiologists, they don't know the workings of the body. When they hit their 40s, they think, geez, something's changed. Like, I just saw a snapshot of me on holiday and I look like a beached whale. I've got to do something. I've lost whatever, I used to be strong, used to have muscle. I want to get that back. So they know they have to do something psychologically, but the biology says, I don't like this all out, effort in the gym. That's, it would be like, running hurdles on the track. It's not a pleasant activity, but it's that type of activity that is necessary to activate and engage and stimulate and thus preserve those three classes of muscle fiber. If you do something that our psyches like going for a walk, you're only going to use slow twitch fibers. And over time, you send a message to your body that the other two classes of fiber are dead weight because you're not using them. So it hastens their deterioration. So it's important to do a type of activity that we might initially perceive as being unpleasant in terms of its effects. Lactic acid burn is not pleasant. Breathing heavily is not pleasant. But it's just basically getting comfortable with your biology. The heavy breathing and the lactic acidosis is simply a byproduct. It's the exhaust system of fast twitch fibers. So the more comfortable you get with your biology and you recognize there's nothing threatening going on, the healthier you will be, and the easier it is to train in a manner that is necessary to preserve all of those fibers and metabolic functions.
And that's what I really liked about this, was when you kind of got into it, and I was thinking, most people are looking at resistance training and saying, okay, well, this is going to get me stronger. This is going to improve my bone density. I may gain some muscle mass, but it goes well beyond that, in that if you're training appropriately with resistance training, as you mentioned in the book, with what you call the high energy output, you are tapping into your glycogen stores through all three types of muscle fiber. And as a result, you're actually setting yourself up to be metabolically advantaged. So if you're struggling with high blood sugar, like prediabetes or diabetes, if you're struggling with weight gain, that actually resistance exercise done the right way can actually go a long way towards helping you with that.
Oh, absolutely. More so than any other activity, really. And that is probably the only reason, apart from safety considerations, that resistance training moves to the fore. It comes to the front of the line as the preferred form of exercise. Number one, it's low force. If you run, you've got anywhere from 3 to 5 times body weight coming down on the joints of a single foot, when you're running. And then you also have the other issue that every time you do an activity, be it weight training, running, lifting a coffee cup, it's like a rope going over the face of a rock in terms of joints and wear and tear. Now, the hinge joints in your knees or the hinge joints in your elbows are not that dissimilar from the hinge joints in a door, in that they have a lifetime of normal use built into them. Exceed that normal use quantity, and you're on a fast track to a replacement. So when someone goes out for a bicycle ride, let's say, which is a seemingly innocuous activity, at the very least, they're going to open and close the hinge joints in their knees 10,000 times, at the very least. So it's not that dissimilar to going to your door and opening and closing it 10,000 times over and above the normal use of that door. And if you do it 3 or 4 days a week, you've got a multiplier to put on it as well. So it's not a coincidence that people who are heavily involved in athletics, for example, and have 2 or 3 practices a week and maybe 1 or 2 games a week through a varsity career or high school and college, all of them end up arthritic. I can't think of anyone I knew who was on the varsity football team or a hockey team that now hasn't either had a knee or a hip replacement or severe arthritis. And it's overuse. And I think the earlier we're cognizant of this in our lives, the less problems we're going to have down the road. The benefit from exercise comes from a deep fatiguing of the muscles. That's the prompt to cause the body to make an adaptation, whether it's in terms of endurance, which essentially is more glycogen storage in a muscle, or strength in a muscle. And, shy of that, there's not really a hell of a lot more you can get out of exercise anyway. So when people say, well, I'm going to do this for my cardiovascular system, as if running, for example, the muscles involved in running were somehow divorced from resistance training, or when you do resistance training. But the problem with that is when the CEP kicks in, you now have to change that running program in order to get the same benefit, the same stimulus, same effect, same fiber involved. And that typically equates to running greater distances. So now, or cycling greater distances. So in the case of the cyclist, those 10,000 opening and closings now have to be extended to 20,000, to 30,000, to 50,000. And so that rope goes over that rock face that many more times. And again, all to reach the end goal, which is to fatigue the muscles meaningfully enough that the body produces a positive adaptive response. And that's what it is. If you think about the best example of fiber recruitment, stimulation, and the effect would be cycling. Again, if you were cycling on the flat, and let's say you went out with a buddy, you could converse for as long as you wanted to, an hour, hour and a half, back and forth while you're riding on a flat surface, because you're only using slow twitch fibers. You're not even really aware of your legs moving. But then you come to a hill, and as you start to go up the hill, gravity now starts to pull you back the other way. So the muscles have to work harder to keep you moving upward or up the grade. And consequently, at some point, at the lower base of the hill, you begin to feel something's going on metabolically in my muscles. Now I'm aware of it. Maybe we're not going to converse at quite the same rate that we were prior to this. But you continue on. And as you get closer to the summit, your legs are on fire. You're breathing very heavily. You have to stand up now because it's very difficult to complete the revolutions of the pedals. And maybe even you have to stop and get off the bike and walk it up the rest of the way. But once you do that, you notice that your breathing continues, the heavy breathing, for a protracted period. There's a tremendous cardiovascular stimulation, far greater than what you had for riding for an hour on the flat surface, just from maybe 30 seconds to a minute of demanding muscular work, high energy output muscular work. And so with resistance training, we can manipulate certain variables, the load, the time of the muscles under load, and we can also control the forces, which is very important for our joint health. But when you finish a proper set of squats or leg presses or whatever lower body exercise you choose to do, it should feel like you just rode your bike to the summit of that hill from a cardiovascular and metabolic standpoint.
Yeah. As I was getting into that part of the book, I was thinking, okay, well, you're kind of talking about high intensity interval training, but I guess the problem with high intensity interval training is typically there's also the forces involved. But when you go to the resistance training, you're able to control the force.
Well, right. I mean, high intensity interval training, there's lots of ways you can do it. Typically, it's done on a bicycle or a stationary bike. At least that's what most of the studies have been done on, because it's easier to test VO2 max and things like that in a controlled environment. But when you pull back big enough and take a more macro view of things, you see that in both cases it's demanding muscular work. And resistance training, I mean, that could be another definition for it, is demanding muscular work. And so the more demanding the muscular work you do, the briefer your such exposure to that type of work has to be. And that's simply because you run through fibers at a quicker rate and you exhaust them. Just like the faster you run, the less distance you can run. So demanding muscular work is good. And it gives us the benefit that we touched on at the beginning of freeing up more time. You don't have to be riding your bike for 4 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. Because again, all of our adaptations are fixed, they're capped. And that includes cardiovascular adaptations. That's why not all of us can be Lance Armstrongs. We just don't have that genetic fifth gear that Lance had that allowed him to excel in cycling. He's perhaps not our best example because Lance took a lot of other things as well to become a great cyclist, but genetically he had the gift to be an exceptional cyclist before he veered off into chemicals. And other people have that gift to be great hockey players. The best example of that would be, I think I mentioned the book, is Wayne Gretzky. He is bar none the greatest hockey player in history because of the amount of records that he set. And let's say you've been studying physiology and exercise science for 30 years, and a parent comes to you and says, Alan, I want you to train my son for hockey. I want you to get him as strong as possible because he's going to be playing a midget level hockey next year. And you say, yeah, okay, I can share with him what I know. But right after he leaves, he gets a phone call from Wayne Gretzky who says, hey, I'll train your kid. Who's he going to go with? Most parents are going to go with the athlete because he knows this guy's been there. He's got the tips and secrets to make him a superstar. So interestingly enough, Wayne Gretzky was made the head coach of the Phoenix Coyotes team in the NHL some years back. And he was the head coach for a period of 5 years. So for 5 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, each of those players had the full benefit of his wisdom, his whatever tips and secrets Wayne Gretzky had to impart. And they finished dead last every one of those years and didn't produce one player of the caliber of Wayne Gretzky, which tells me at least Wayne had a gift. It was genetics. He can't tell you why he was the greatest hockey player in the world. It just worked out for him, it just happened to be that way. He had the right genes to excel in the sport of hockey, whereas most people don't, which is why most people never make it to that and the NHL level, let alone shatter all the records in the NHL. But you can see that right across the board in athletics.
When I was playing football, you had Herschel Walker, and this guy just walks out, and he's just this huge specimen of a man, and you're like, holy crap, what is he doing? You're just like, well, what is he doing? I want to do what he does.
Yeah,
he's just doing push-ups and sit-ups.
Yep.
And you're like,
he had the gift.
I could do push-ups and sit-ups, I'm not going to look like that. I'm not going to be that fast. I'm not going to be that strong. There's just some aspects.
Well, and every sport
couldn't really coach me because he doesn't know what it's like to be a little guy.
Well, and the reality is, whether you're Herschel Walker's coach or Wayne Gretzky's Pee Wee coach, he trained and played his players exactly all the same.
Yeah.
And yet Wayne Gretzky came out of that. So if he wanted to hang up a shingle and say, send your kid to me, I trained Wayne Gretzky and Pee Wee and look where he is now, he'd probably have made a lot of money. But the reality is everybody that trained in the same way that Wayne Gretzky did went nowhere on his Pee Wee team. So it's these guys falling through the genetic cracks that excel because they have this genetic gift. Herschel Walker's a perfect example. Bo Jackson was another example. Jim Brown before him was another phenom who just had the genetics to be an exceptional football player. And these are the ones that make it to the top. And it's the very fact that they are exceptional that is far different from the norm that has caught our attention in the first place and what distances them from ourselves. They are how we would love to be, but we won't be. Yeah. But, we like to entertain that thought as long as possible because who wouldn't want to be Herschel Walker.
But, getting back to kind of what we can be, because we're all now well past that point.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Even thinking that's possible. But I do want to get into this because you've got some training protocols in the book, and I really want to help someone understand how, when we talk about this deep fatigue or, the high energy output, how does that relate to a workout, and then why does that then result in us spending actually less time in the gym?
Well, you spend less time in the gym because of the nature of how the programs are engineered. Number one, you want to use all three classes of fibers, and we want to do what's called a sequential recruitment, which means you go from slow twitch to intermediate twitch to fast twitch. And for that to happen, there has to be a meaningful load imposed upon the muscles so that all the work isn't done by slow twitch fibers. If the weight is too light, since we have a type of fiber, slow twitch, which is very slow to fatigue and very quick to recover, they're the same fibers you'd use on a walk, for example. It's very easy for the fibers that you initiated the exercise with to recover by the time you've completed a certain amount of repetitions. And therefore, you never break out of that cycle. It's slow twitch, slow twitch, slow twitch, slow twitch. But if the load is meaningful, that's like you riding the bike up the hill. Now you're going through these fibers at a rate quicker than they can recover at. And the body has no choice but to recruit the next order of fibers in line. So they move on to the intermediate twitch. And if those fatigue out before the slow twitch fibers that you started with fatigue out, then it will move on to the final class, which is fast twitch. And that's where you'll notice, the difference in respiration and the burn and all of these things. So the protocols are, because they're demanding, because they cycle through fibers at a quicker rate, you're basically out of gas after about 1.5 to 2 minutes of work. So it's like you starting your bike ride up the hill, halfway up the hill. You're just clipping off the hour you did on the flat, which didn't really do much except recycle slow twitch fibers. But they're also done with an eye toward minimizing wear and tear, or opening and closing of the joints. One protocol in the book, which is called Done in One, requires but one repetition, just performed incredibly slowly. It can take up to 2 minutes to complete a full extension and contraction of a muscle. Other protocols, such as the Max Pyramid, will burn you out really quickly, and in fact is so demanding that you might not need more than 2 exercises in a given workout to reap the full benefit, because you simply won't have, you'll want to give 100%, but you won't have 100% left to give for a third exercise, let's say. And the protocol that I tend to start most people with is an old one, and went back to the 1940s. It was designed by the physiologist Orm and Watkins. And the reason I put it in there is because it's time tested. It's probably put more muscle on more people than any other protocol combined. And indeed, I would venture to say that most other protocols since then have been footnotes to DeLorme and Watkins' method. And it's pretty standard. It's 3 sets, approximately 10 reps. First set is very light and is strictly a warm-up that utilizes some slow twitch fibers. Second set is heavier. It uses what's left of your slow twitch and some intermediate twitch. But then the third set's the work set. It's the one that allows you to incorporate or to activate all 3 classes of muscle fiber. And so it's just 3 sets of 10. It's the most basic, fundamental training protocol in the history of resistance training.
Yeah. And you can pretty much do these with just some full body exercises like the deadlift, the leg press, the squat, bench press, overhead press. And in a sense, you'll get a full body compound movement workout with 3 to 4 exercises. And, if you're doing that 3 by 8 and you're not taking big, long rests between this, then basically you can get through a workout in, less than 20 minutes for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Most of our clients don't work out longer than 12 minutes. And that's at the high end. Some can be as low as 6. But the idea really isn't to look at a clock to see whether or not you've exhausted your muscles. You're going to know if you've exhausted them by the effort you've put forth. And we keep progress charts and notes so that, there is no wasted time. We know what weights you can use, and we know, how long, in the case of using a stopwatch, you can sustain that contraction, or how many repetitions you can perform, so that when you come in the next week, we know exactly where to start you. So you're not wasting any time.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, time is such a big thing. We don't think of it in exercise because we're used to seeing people get better by doing something more. You get better at the piano by practicing more. You get better at stick handling in hockey by practicing more. All of these things require more time to lay down certain neural pathways to perfect a skill set. But conditioning training is a completely different animal. It's not a skill set. Although there's some motor learning involved, it is a metabolically demanding, high energy output activity. And when you're tapping fibers such as the fast twitch fibers, they were not, they're not on our bodies as something that we needed to use on a daily basis. When our ancestors didn't have fight or flight situations imposed upon them, every day from 11 until 2. Like people at the gym. These were sporadic occurrences, maybe every 7 to 10 days. And consequently, our bodies never evolved a means by which the fast twitch fibers or the fight or flight fibers required a really quick recuperation before they could be brought into service again. And so they don't. It takes time for those fibers to recover, and it takes time for those fibers to adapt. And slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers do not share the same recovery profile. So while you can go for a walk for an hour using slow twitch fibers, and upon your return home, you could probably go for a walk again because you've recovered from that. Very low, it's not a high energy output activity. But you do a set of reasonably heavy squats to the point of muscular failure where you can't complete another rep, try and do another set right away. You won't have the inclination because all of your energy and resources have been called upon at a very, very high level. And then you just have to give your body and nature, if you will, time to make the necessary adjustments. So the next time you perform such an exercise in such a fashion, it's not nearly as demanding physiologically as it was the last time you did it.
Yeah. That's one of the beginner questions I get all the time is, should I just do the same workout every day? And I'm like, no. If you did it right the first day, you don't want to do it the next couple of days.
And you don't want to do it again until you really have to. I mean, there's two factors. One, the immediate after effect of a workout is a depletion. You get weaker. Energy was used up. Glycogen was burned up, which is an energy cell in a muscle. And in some cases, fibers are damaged. So when that happens, you're not looking to do that again. You're essentially tripping the growth and repair mechanism of the body into motion by doing these workouts. And that's the same mechanism that comes into play if you should ever, cut yourself or burn yourself. And the next time that should happen, just informally observe how long it takes for that little bit of skin or dermis to bridge the wound. And that's just a little bit. It's usually 7 to 10 days anyway. So the healing process, which is where the benefit that we're after occurs, takes time. It's not, it would be the workout is the stimulus, which is like when you cut your hand. That's a stimulus to your body to produce new tissue to close the wound. And when you work out with the weights, it's a stimulus to your body to produce a little more, a thickening of the muscle. But you don't hasten that process by recutting your hand every day. You delay it, and the same is true with a workout. And I remember speaking with Doug McGuff about this, and he said, interesting point, John. He said, did you know that the skin repairs itself through the ectodermal germline, whereas muscles come from the mesodermal germline? And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, well, here's what you need to know about it. He said, the ectodermal germline, which you mentioned with the cut, which takes over 7 to 10 days to heal, he goes, is a germline that heals much, much quicker than muscle does. He said, so if you scratch your cornea, it can be pretty well on its way to repair in 12 hours. So, if you're going to be doing a very demanding workout, don't beat yourself up if 7 days tick by and you haven't been back to the gym yet. You may need the extra day or two for full recovery because, again, it comes from a metabolic line that is not quick in turning over proteins necessary for a rapid repair.
Okay. Well, John, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
That's interesting because it's an interesting definition because it consists of 3 completely unrelated conditions that are under one umbrella term, but each is important to consider. Fitness is your ability to function, to do things that you want to do. Health is simply the absence of disease. And happiness is a subjective term, is what makes one person happy might bore another person to tears. But I believe that the type of training that we've been discussing, high energy output training, will look after the first condition you mentioned. And to some extent, it will positively impact your health as well. It won't cure disease, but it might help prevent your health from deteriorating to the point where your body can't combat certain elements that might lead to diseases, such as, say, diabetes. And perhaps the ability of your body to carry out the dictates of your mind in terms of doing things you really want to do and enjoy doing might lead to happiness of a sort and stave off conditions such as depression to some degree, which, in fact, the medical literature has indicated about resistance training. But only you can infuse your life with purpose depending upon your individual psyche, and that will give you peace of mind to some degree. Happiness is an interesting topic because as a perpetual state is foreign to human beings, and I'm not sure that it would be desirable, as there is a vast spectrum of human emotions that collectively make up what we could call the human condition, and some of them are the furthest thing from pure happiness. But to experience them all, to live your life with each nerve fully exposed during this brief go-round that we have, is to experience the totality of your humanity. And according to some philosophies, at least, your experience of a particular emotion's opposite tends to heighten your experience of that emotion when you experience it again, as you often only know things through contradistinction. So after all, what would darkness mean if you only ever knew light? But to your point, given that the studies have shown that your health can be preserved with proper resistance training, given that the studies have shown that your functional ability can be tremendously enhanced through proper resistance training. And given the fact that studies have also shown an interrelationship between psyche and soma, for example, if you're constantly worried and stressed, you can get a physical condition known as an ulcer. You have to think that would also work in reverse. So whatever it is that makes you happy, usually it's an activity of something that you enjoy. You need your muscles to get you to it or to perform it. And this is a means by which you will enhance and preserve your ability to do those things that you enjoy, and to do it, as best you can in the absence of a disease, better than any other activity, and certainly far quicker and more thoroughly than any other activity.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you because, I think, if you kind of go back to some of the happiest times in your life, it typically involves you spending time with someone that you care about, like
Right.
a grandchild or something like that, and your ability to be engaged with them and doing the things that need to be done. So I agree with you there. And then, if you're really doing this workout the way you're supposed to, it's not going to be the most pleasant day of your life.
Yeah.
At least not
but if you can tolerate
12 minutes. So you're going to be very unhappy for that 12 minutes, but in the long run.
Yeah. If you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable for 6 to 12 minutes a week in order to have all of the benefits that resistance training can give you, maybe it's a deal worth taking.
I think it is. I really do. So John, if someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the books that you've written and the things that you're doing, where would you like for me to send them?
Well, I don't really have a dedicated website about any of that. Certainly for the books, they can go to any of the online bookstores. They're available there. Amazon carries all of my books, and that will at least be able to give them a means to see what I'm interested in and what I'm working on. And as I tend to publish quite a few of those, and if they're on Facebook, feel free to look me up and say hello.
Okay. Well, you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/388, and I'll be sure to have links to the books and also to John's Facebook. So John, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Well, thank you, Alan. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with John Little. It's always good to get the most out of our time working out so that we're getting the best benefit in the shortest amount of time. Bang for the buck, right? So go back and listen to that again. Go ahead and get his book, The Time Savers Workout. Really good book as well. I did want to let you know, again, I do have those slots for one-on-one training. You can email me, alan@40plusfitnesspodcast.com, and I'll send you an application. But if you're just on the fence with this and you're just not quite sure, why don't we schedule a 15-minute consult? You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/15MIN. And we can schedule a 15-minute consult. We can talk about what your needs are. We can talk about what your goals are. I can give you a little bit on the phone there just to kind of give you a little taste of what it's like to be working with me one-on-one. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/15MIN. That's 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/15MIN. Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Nikki Steinberger and discuss her book, Wave Goodbye to Type 2 Diabetes. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.